ladies and gentlemen, you're back once again with the Economancer. So, today we're going to be jumping into something a little bit different, but it's still associated with communication theory. And really, I guess you could say the godfather of communications theory is Edmund Husserl. And so I'm going to give you a statement made by him. And if you're familiar with this statement, it was asked me the other day. We can only ever know with certainty things that are given entirely by the senses at any one time. What does this mean? So, Husserl reflects his belief in the importance of the senses and the immediate experience in the process of knowledge and understanding. Basically, the senses provide us with some direct access to the world around us, and it is through the direct contact with the world that we gain certain knowledge. So this idea is really central to Husserl's philosophy of phenomenology, which aims to describe the structure of conscious experience and then the way in which we perceive and make sense of the world. So we can also look at what does he mean by knowledge, because this statement can get unbounded or bounded very quickly. So it's really kind of difficult to provide like a single definitive definition of what he means in this philosophy, as over time, as with many philosophers, this subject evolves over the course of their career. But here are some central and key ideas on Husserl's concept of knowledge. First, for Husserl, knowledge involves a certain degree of certainty and clarity. So in order for something to count as knowledge, it must be based on reliable evidence, and it must be capable of being articulated in a clear and precise manner. Second, knowledge for Husserl is not just a collection of isolated facts, but rather a systematic and interconnected body of understanding. So that to truly know something, one must be able to see it in relation to other things and to understand the underlying principles and patterns that govern it. Finally, Husserl believed that knowledge is not simply a matter of passively receiving information from the outside world, but rather involves an active process of discovery and exploration. So in order for us to gain knowledge, we have to be open to new experiences and be willing to engage in critical thinking and reflection. And so something to think about for that second that second piece on the knowledge for Husserl, that it's not just a collection of isolated facts. If you've watched any of my videos on theory and public policy, or just theory in general, you see that I carry this strong notion that when people say facts don't care about your feelings, so on and so forth, that's actually fundamentally incorrect. Now, it is true that facts do exist independent of the theory, but the theory molds and frames those facts in such a way that we can understand them. If you just say, well, here are an isolated set of facts, they don't really tell me anything about the body of knowledge that you're associating your argument with. It just tells me that here are some facts, but those facts could, just be empty thoughts. So one of the biggest fallacies in economics that we deal with is called the reasoning from a price change, where when a price changes, everybody tries to reason from it or tries to come to some conclusion about that price change, when in reality that they may actually overthink the problem. All right, here's another piece of information on him. So what was his ontology? So if you're not familiar, ontology is the study of being and nature of existence. So in the work of Edmund Husserl, ontology plays a central role, as he was deeply concerned with understanding the nature of reality and the structure of consciousness. Husserl's ontology can be seen as a form of realism, in that he believed in the existence of a mind-independent world that exists independently of our perceptions and thoughts about it. However, he also recognized that our access to this world is mediated by our subjective experiences and our cognitive processes, that these experiences and processes shape the way in which we understand and make sense of the world. Very similar to some of the statements I was giving about us living in a matrix. Husserl's ontology is characterized by his concept of the life world, which refers to the shared background knowledge, values, and expectations that shape our understanding of the world and our interactions with others. So according to him, the life world is not just a collection of objective facts, but rather a rich and complex web of meaning that guides our understanding of the world and our place in it. And then we can also think about Husserl's ontology is shaped by the concept of intentionality, which refers back to that our consciousness is always directed towards something. For Husserl, this means that we are never simply aware of raw sensory data, but rather we are always interpreting and making sense of the world. And if you watch my video on baptizing Lumen, this is essentially what Lumen is really pointing at for the importance of religion from a secular perspective, is that religion is what directs our thoughts, directs our consciousness towards something, and that something is the supernatural, is being in communion with other people, and then is being in communion with the higher order being, again, God. So if you're thinking about this problem of Edmund Husserl's knowledge and how it's being addressed, is how can we gain certainty about the world and our place within it if all of those things that I just stated previously were true, similar to the problems of the Matrix. And so the problem with the issue related to subjectivity is our experiences and perceptions are necessarily shaped by our own individual perspectives and cognitive processes. So Husserl sought to address this problem through, again, his philosophy of phenomenology, which aims to describe the structure of conscious experience and the way in which we perceive and make sense of the world. According to Husserl, the key to gaining certainty about the world is to examine our experiences and perceptions in a systematic and self-reflective way. So in order to understand the underlying principles and patterns that govern them. And so what this kind of sets up and means is that when we're looking at how our theoretical understanding of, say, some public policy comes to, before we try to implement this, we need to just think about what's going on in a systematic and self-reflective way. If I am in the system from first order cybernetics, right, or from first order cybernetics, I'm outside of the system. I get to observe the inputs, the outputs, the control mechanism, and the hidden layer there of all the inner workings. I'm able to observe that. But if I'm in the system and I'm looking around, I can only observe what's visible to me. And so how can I then criticize the system that I exist in? Because I can't get around it. I'm in it. So I have to self-reflect to understand that I'm in the system, and that will allow me to see those principles and patterns that govern the system itself. Another problem of knowledge that Husserl addressed is the issue of how can we communicate and share our understanding of the world with others. This problem is related to the concept of intersubjectivity, which refers to the recognition that our understanding of the world is not purely individual, but is shaped by our interactions with others. Husserl believed that in order to communicate effectively, it is necessary to be attuned to the experiences and perspectives of the other person and to be open to the possibility of revising our own understanding of knowledge in light of this new work. So if you're thinking about Husserl's philosophy of phenomenology and the study of communications, first, Husserl's emphasis on the importance of the senses and the immediate experience can be applied to a way in which we communicate with one another. In order to communicate effectively, it is necessary to be attuned to the sensory experiences of the other person, such as their facial expressions, their body language, and their tone of voice. These sensory cues can provide us with valuable information about the other person's thoughts, feelings, and intentions, and this helps us understand the meaning of their words. This is why you can communicate with someone even if you don't speak the same language, because there are underlying communications happening. Because again, only communication communicates, and only through this shared meaning can we, this co-creation of meaning, this shared mutual information, do we actually come to something that makes sense. Second, Husserl's concept of the life world can be seen as relevant to the way in which communication occurs within a particular cultural or social context. The life world refers to the shared background knowledge, values, and expectations that shape our understanding of the world and our interactions with one another. When we communicate with others, we draw upon the resources of the life world in order to make sense of what is being said and to respond appropriately. And again, this goes back to that transactional model of communication that we were talking about. When we have our shared life world with someone, so we're in communion with them, so one Orthodox Christian to another, we have this shared background knowledge, values, and expectations, and those shape the world that we live in, and they shape how we interact with one another. And finally, Husserl's idea of intersubjectivity, which is probably his most important work, can be seen as relevant to the way in which communication involves the interaction between two or more individuals. Intersubjectivity refers to the recognition that our understanding of the world is not purely individual, but is shaped by our interactions with others. In communication, we rely on a shared understanding and perspective of the other person in order to make sense of what is being said and respond appropriately. This intersubjectivity is one of the main bases for basically not just how we communicate, but the field of communication itself. Again, this was very important in the work of Luhmann. This was very important in the work of Julian Marias, in the work of Ortega, and in the work of Loed Leidesdorff and Krippendorff, and all of these other either philosophers, communication scientists, so on and so forth. It's fundamental. It's also fundamental to basic cognitive psychology, because again, if we're thinking about how the consciousness is, if we allow consciousness to be real in the manner, and we allow it the possibility of thought and exists for no other reason than then if we think consciously and actively, then it means there is an existence of such thought that does not break the principle of sufficient reason. But the I thinking, the phenomenological I, that I brings into consciousness, though we might be the terminus of a particular chain of causation. Essentially meaning that when we have our knowledge, we have our own individual way of knowing, our own individual way of seeing the world. We live in our own individual matrix. And then through our processes of communications, we actually open up and reveal more of the world to us. Because if you find someone who lives by themselves for their entirety of their life, they can have all the books, any type of technology associated with them, they still will never understand without other individuals being able to interact, and that intersubjectivity is where that knowledge is truly gained. We can see the world, feel the world, and know the world, but only through the communion of others do we actually have knowledge that's gained and growed. And that background knowledge is not just what we create ourselves. Even though our mind is operationally closed, it's still functionally open. So that background knowledge is not just built by ourselves, it's built by other people. Our operationally closed mind allows us to kind of frame it for ourselves, for us to understand. And that's a part of that co-creation of meaning, because we have our own frame, we have our own thoughts, we have our own beliefs, but that's shaped by the other people in this world through this communication, understanding, and that cultural, social context, those knowledge, values, expectations that shape our life world, shapes theirs, and so on and so forth, forwards and backwards until we come to the conclusion of what really exists. And I think that this is fundamentally one of the most important pieces of communications theory that a lot of communications theorists do generally touch on, but it's never given the amount of love and admiration that it should be, right? Because this is important not just for communications theory. This is also important in our understanding of how we live in the life world. This transcendence of being that exists for the really real, to take the term from St. Gregory of Nyssa, this really real and our communion with it through the saints, through prayer and stuff like that, is fundamentally important. And with that, I hope you have learned something. Please like, share, subscribe. Again, if you haven't, join that Discord down below. It's a super awesome place, and I hope you have a wonderful day.